Next, we'll move to the second value box. You're going to need a 4H pencil for this. All you'll have to do here is shade in the box with an even second value. This blend should be easy to hatch together because the transition from an F-lead to a 4H isn't very abrupt. They're both hard lead, so neither of them leave a grain behind. As we progress in the course, I'm going to phase out pencils this hard. With some practice, you should be able to shade in a value this light with an H pencil. And tidy up your shading with a rubber eraser, and we're finished. Next, we'll be doing a blend down to 6th value from 10th value, starting with a scumbling blend, then transitioning to a linear blend. Begin with your 6B pencil, here's your finish line, and just repeat what you did here on the first box you shaded. Build it up to here, just like before. I'm sure you're all excited to get started drawing hands and eyes, etc., but this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. The first couple of lessons are absolutely necessary to teach you the fundamentals. Drawing is a lot like playing an instrument. You have to learn good habits or you'll be practicing bad ones, which will limit your ability to make progress. So please, bear with me for the first couple of lessons. I promise we'll get to the fun stuff. I wouldn't be a very good teacher if I didn't make absolutely sure you had a solid foundation, and I wouldn't want to leave any of the less experienced students behind. That looks good, let's move to a 4B pencil next. That looks like it's getting close. For the overlap transition, change to a linear blend. A linear blend is like cross-hatching, but instead of going over your lines in different directions like plaid, only make lines in one direction, like you would see in a comic book. We're going to switch to a 2B lead next, so you're going to create the crosshatch with that. Doing that should help make the transition less abrupt. Okay, let's move to a 2B pencil and start the linear blend. And since the 8th value blend is going in the opposite direction, it will just naturally hatch into it. When you get to the 8th value, scumble over the whole box with your 2B pencil. It's not going to change the value, it'll just fill in the grain and make the gradient and texture look smoother. Remember, it's a linear blend, so fight the urge to crosshatch. Just continue going in one direction and adding pressure. The hatching and cross-hatching textures you're creating may or may not seem interesting to you when you're just filling in these boxes, but that's because you're seeing them out of context. I assure you they'll look good when you apply them to a drawing. Here are some examples of hands we're going to draw in the coming lessons. Can you see how the linear shading and cross-hatching add texture and make these drawings look dynamic and energetic? Of course, your shading doesn't always have to be this loose. In the coming lessons, I'm going to show you how to control the softness of your shading so that you can make your drawings as realistic or dynamic as you want. Like this hand we're going to draw together in Lesson 3. And this one. Do you see it now? If you look closely, all of the shading in these drawings is done with hatching and cross-hatching. Now that you know that, look closely at Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, and you'll see the exact same technique being used. This shading exercise is extremely important because I'm making sure you start off with good habits. Otherwise, you would be practicing bad habits, and for those of you who already formed some bad habits, this exercise is designed to help you break them and get you on the right track. So even if they occasionally seem a little tedious, be sure to finish each one. And this may surprise you, but at first, some of you may actually feel like you're getting worse at shading. That's natural. This is a great lesson my life drawing teacher taught me back while I was studying in college, and it really applies to learning anything. When you're doing a technique wrong, there's a limit to how good you can get at it. So, for example, if you're playing an instrument using improper fingering, there's a plateau that you will reach where you can't get any better without circling back and relearning it the right way. Of course, when you learn something new, you're not going to be good at it right away, so your performance will dip. But with some practice, you'll surpass your old plateau and reach a new level. Just erase anywhere you went outside of the lines, and let's move on to the next set of boxes. For the next exercise, we'll be using a blending stick that looks like this, called a tortillon. I find that they're helpful for beginners to get smoother gradients, although I should state that I'm firmly against them because they make you lose all pencil texture. But I would be remiss if I didn't explain all the different methods to shading in this course so you can choose for yourself. Fair warning, for those of you who like blending sticks, I'm going to make it my business to wean you off of them as you progress in this course. They're very inexpensive, but you don't even have to purchase them at the store. You can create a makeshift tortillon just by tightly rolling up a small piece of paper and taping it so it doesn't unravel. As you can see, I'm using a 5B pencil, and just like in the previous boxes, I've gone into the next box to create overlap. And feel free to use whatever blend you're comfortable with, because the shading tool is going to do most of the work in creating the gradient. Just keep building up the value until it matches the 9th value box in your grayscale. That looks good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect because the blending tool is going to smudge the pencil leads to create the gradient. Next, we're going to transition from 9th value to 6th value, so I'm going to switch to a 2B pencil. Next is 3rd value, so you'll need an H lead. I'll use a 4H pencil to help the transition into 1st value, but for those of you who are getting better at controlling pencil pressure, that shouldn't be necessary. What we're left with is a series of different pencil textures that are rammed together, for lack of a better term, and this is where the blending tool can come in handy. It's incredibly easy to use, just rub it over the blend you want to soften and it'll smudge your shading together as well as get rid of any pencil grain left behind by the softer leads. Your transition from 9th value to 1st value should be incredibly smooth. Now that you know how to use this tool, I suggest you only use it when it's absolutely necessary, because as you can see it tends to make the shading look cloudy. The ideal approach to shading is to learn to control the amount of pressure you apply to your pencil. Okay, for this row, I'd like you to try hatching from 1st value up to 5th value. Since we're staying on the lighter end of the scale, we'll only be using the harder leads, so you can begin on the lightest value and gradually get darker, since you won't need to worry about blending different pencil grains together. So let's start with a 4H pencil. I'll hold the pencil way back here to give me maximum control over the pressure I'm using. And I'll simply cross-hatch in the 2nd value box, giving myself the usual overlap into the 3rd value box. Okay, moving to 3rd value, I'll pick up an H pencil and do the same. Moving along to fourth value, I'll switch to an F lead. And finally a B pencil for fifth value. Because the F lead is a midtone, you may have to work it into the previous lead a little more than the others. Just keep hatching it into the fourth value box until the gradient matches up. Clean up your line with a rubber eraser, and let's move on to the final row. Since we're shading from 10th value down to 6th value, we'll be working dark to light again to help control the grain. So start with your 6B pencil. As you can see, I want you to begin with a scumbling technique and transition into a linear blend for 6th and 7th value. The challenge will be to make those two blending styles merge in the 8th value box. I'll change the direction of my pencil line right about here, and I want it to overlap about this far. I'm switching to a 4B lead and changing from shading with scumbling to a linear blend. I've decided to change directions. I want the angle of the lines in this blend to go from bottom to top. You don't have to, I just thought it would be beneficial for you to see some variety in my examples. I'm switching to a 3B lead for 7th value and continuing with the linear shading in the same direction. Finally move to a 2B lead and continue to keep your hatches parallel. Okay, finished. Now, using a rubber eraser, just clean up anywhere your lines went outside the box. There's always a lot with linear shading. And you're finished with Lesson 3.